Jeremiah McClellan was a commit, of course, to Ohio State, who flipped in the last couple hours to Oregon.
Yeah, there was, to say the least, on our site, bucknuts.com, there was some angst this morning because at that point, it looked like Jeremiah McClellan was going to flip. There was a lot of talk that Edric Houston, the five-star defensive end out of Georgia, was going to flip. And some even went as far as to feeling like maybe Jeremiah Smith would flip. I wasn't in the camp of those all flipping, but I'm just saying there were some people that were thinking that way.
Well, as you know better than I do, and I think Urban Meyers famously said this, that if you're Ohio State and you have gotten a commitment, let's say from Florida in particular, and even the Deep South to a certain extent, until that guy is signed on National Signing Day, there's always reason to think, okay, we got to do everything we can to manage this relationship and make sure it lasts all the way to National Signing Day.
Yeah, and the Ohio State staff now under Ryan Day, they recruit these kids all the way through. They don't assume anything. They don't take a break. Now that doesn't mean they're all going to be able to save them all, so to speak, and get them all the way through the process as Buckeyes, but they're fighting for them. And in fact, they were battling all day today for a number of prospects. They were battling for Edric Houston, obviously, and making sure Jeremiah Smith was going to stay in the fold. They were working on McClellan. They were working on Amaris Williams, a defensive end edge guy that had committed to Florida that ultimately flipped to Auburn. So they were working on a lot of guys today that not only had committed to Ohio State, but had committed to other schools.
There always seems to be drama concerning the SEC. Those SEC schools seem to be flipping players to the final day. That seems to be an annual competition down there. But Ohio State has typically sewn up a class, protected it, and rode it out to National Signing Day. So there's actually a little bit more drama today than there typically is, based on my memory.
Yeah, I've been doing this. I think this was my 36th National Signing Day. Now, a lot of those were National Signing Days in February, back in the, quote, old days. But nonetheless, 36 National Signing Days. And I would put this right up there with any of those previous 35 as far as drama and keeping an eye on things and wondering exactly what's going to happen. I can tell you at the Woody Hayes facility, they were working hard. It was quite a day at the Woody Hayes facility today.
And Bill, you mentioned we might as well go right to the top of the board with what people are hoping to see very soon, the name Jeremiah Smith. So the video is making its rounds of Ryan Day's news conference today, in which he was asked, I believe, about Jeremiah Smith. And then he lets out a big sigh of relief when it was confirmed that there was the signing there. He didn't want to comment for obvious reasons because there's violations involved. And but it was confirmed. However, it's not been substantiated on your site.
Yeah. Last I was told, right before, well, they have 20 guys in the class, if you count Smith, which I do. So they have 20 guys in the class. 19 of them have signed and returned their national letter of intent to Ohio State. The only one that had is not Jeremiah Smith. And I was told right before we started, I hopped on this podcast actually, that his signing was imminent. Now, you of course hope imminent becomes final in the next few minutes, but it's supposedly he is going to sign his letter of intent within the hour here at Ohio State. So we're keeping an eye on that.
All right, as we make our way through the class, this has been such a strong class for months and months and months and months, has basically held down that number 2 position for a long time. It's going to finish as a top 4 class, something in that range, despite a couple 5-star flips here in the last couple weeks. It would be impossible to go through everyone. Just kind of, we'll run through it starting from the top in regards to giving us some highlights of some of the guys that have signed. I see Aaron Scott, obviously an in-state guy that is one of the best cornerbacks in the country.
Yeah, and assuming Jeremiah Smith signs, you've got the number one player in the entire country in your class. A spectacular wide receiver, guy that I would be shocked almost if he's not on the field next season for Ohio State. Then you got Mylan Graham. Maybe he gets a little overshadowed because of Jeremiah Smith, but Mylan Graham is a 5-star wide receiver too. Really, a guy that could play in the slot, which I think will probably be his starting spot at least. But he also can play out wide, and he's dynamic. You've got Edric Houston, the guy that was the big the big catch for today because so many people thought he was going to go to Alabama. Some people wondered about Jeremiah Smith, but a lot of people thought Edric Houston was done flip for the Tide, but he didn't. And he's a defensive end, a big position of need in this class for Ohio State. He's the only defensive end in this class at this point. And a guy that is a 5-star in his own right. You've got Aaron Scott, a corner out of Springfield. And what we don't have on that screen there is the other corner, Bryce West, who I think those two guys are equally talented. In the case of Bryce West, Ohio State is in need of a little bit of safety help. And Bryce West actually played a lot of this season. He moved to safety for Cleveland Glenville because they were trying to keep teams from throwing away from him all the time. And he could play safety too at Ohio State.
All right. We got Bill Kurlick on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. Everybody head on over there to Bucknuts. They do outstanding work. And Bill in particular, appreciate you spending the time with us today, Bill. Anyone down the board, obviously the attention goes to the 5 stars, the high 4 stars. Anybody down the board that seems like an extremely interesting prospect to you, maybe 2 or 3 guys that could surprise?
Well, I don't think they're going to surprise right away because their position and the development they're going to need. But I really like the Armstrong brothers, Deontay Armstrong and Devontae Armstrong from Lakewood St. Edwards. Deontay is a tackle. Devontae is a guard. And if you look at them, my goodness gracious, they passed the look test with flying colors. They're going to need some time, but I think they both have potential to be not only starters for Ohio State, but all Big Ten type starters for Ohio State. So I like those two a lot. And I also like Ian Moore a lot. He's kind of in the middle of the pack, so to speak, but Ohio State has recruited him as an offensive tackle. I think he could play left or right, and I think he's got a lot of potential. An interesting guy is Demarion Witten from Cleveland Glenville in that he's been really kind of recruited as a tight end mostly or a H-back type guy, but he could play wide receiver too. He's long. He's 6'3", probably 205 pounds, I would say right now, 210 maybe. And he played in an All-American game just the other day, and he played wide receiver, and he was named the MVP of that game, had 3 touchdowns playing wide receiver.
Bill, the quarterback position has obviously gained a lot of attention, always does. Kyle McCord, until something happens here in the next few years, I got to think, my goodness, when are we going to see an 11-1 quarterback who, in a sense, has to go look for another job somewhere else? But that's the state at Ohio State. They've got 3 excellent quarterbacks in the room when we talk Lincoln Keenholz, Devin Brown, and now Air Noland, of course, is a true freshman. You wouldn't think that he would compete for the starting spot. And when I say excellent quarterbacks, I mean excellent in regards to talent and potential. What are your thoughts about, we've got a situation right now with more ready-made transfer quarterbacks originally in the portal. Many of them have been plucked up, about Ohio State looking to take an experienced quarterback versus do they run a 3-man competition and see if somebody emerges, most likely Devin Brown this fall?
Well, I think they're going to continue to evaluate as we move towards the bowl game. They're not going to panic, and they don't need to. Ryan Day actually talked today about being really happy with how Devin Brown and Lincoln Keenholz have looked in these pre-Cotton Bowl practices. He's pretty high on those 2 guys and how they've looked. Now, what we need to see is how one or both, Devin Brown will get the main shot, the first shot at least, how they do in the Cotton Bowl. If they are both in the Cotton Bowl, we know Devin Brown's going to play. and see how he does. Then you've got Aaron Nolan, who's in this class, the 2024 class, coming in. So as of January, you'll have those three guys on the roster as scholarship quarterbacks. Then, in the meantime, I think they'll evaluate. They liked Riley Leonard, the quarterback that has since announced he is transferring to Notre Dame. Will Howard's a guy that they looked at, and I think they'll continue to look. But what people have to remember is that this is just the beginning of the transfer portal. At this point last year, I think Ohio State had commitments from one or two portal guys, and they ended up with 9, I believe. So you've got the rest of this period, which goes till early January for the portal. Then you've got another 15 days where kids on the college playoff teams can get into the portal. So there'll be another batch of kids there, and you got 15 more days. And then you've got the portal after spring ball as well. So there's going to be plenty of time to add a quarterback if they decide to go that route.
Ohio State's obviously been the recruiting giant in this conference and one of the top 3 or 4 nationally. Michigan's bringing in a class that's ranked right now at number 20, but they've been much more active in the portal and made more significant impact in the portal, especially at offensive line and other spots on both sides of the ball. You mentioned Ohio State grabbing 9. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking Davison Igbinosun would have had the greatest impact. And then probably Josh Simmons after him would be the 2 guys that played significant time. Vic Cutler, not so much. Do you think Ohio State is going to be a bigger player in the portal this offseason?
I think a lot will depend on what happens with guys on the roster. Their first objective right now is to keep their best players at Ohio State. For instance, they would love for JT Tuimoloau to come back to Ohio State next season. They would love for Tyleik Williams to come back to Ohio State next season. Jordan Hancock is another one. And there are a bunch of other guys that kind of fill that situation. Now, I don't think much of anybody is holding out hope that Marvin Harrison is coming back, but there is hope for some of those other guys to come back. And most of them have already said they're playing in the Cotton Bowl, and we'll see what happens from there. So if a number of those guys come back, Travion Henderson is another one at running back. If a number of those guys come back, they don't need to hit the portal quite as hard necessarily as if a number of them leave. So I think they're going to wait and see. And some of those guys are waiting for their paperwork to come back from the NFL to make their decisions. You know, am I going to be a first rounder? Am I going to be a second rounder? Am I going to be a fifth rounder? And would it be in my best interest to stay at Ohio State? So they're going to look at that and make their decisions as they find out what these kids are going to do. If enough of them go, then I think they'll hit the portal just as hard or maybe even harder than they did last year. But if enough of those guys stay, they'll be very happy too. I don't think anybody out there would trade anybody in the portal at this time for, say, JT Tuimoloau.
No. For as much as the portal is gaining a lot of attention, and there is some excellent talent there, more so than there was the first year or two, more established players in the portal and just mass volume. Yeah. try to find the number 1 rated player in the country coming out of high school who has fulfilled to a certain extent those expectations to a certain extent. But he may be better served to come back. And I got to say that I was expecting a mass exodus for the NFL and opting out of this bowl game, and it hasn't happened. So it's a credit to those guys. And it's also the circumstance involving them making a judgment call on their careers.
And I didn't mention Jack Sawyer. If you get one or both Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau back, and then if you get one or both of their interior guys, Tyleik Williams and Mike Hall back, then 2 to 4 of those guys back make a huge difference on the Ohio State defensive line for next season.
Bill, before we let you go, you mentioned 36 years doing this, and then we've got a bowl game. And in those 36 years, in the last 6 years, these bowl games and the perception of them has changed considerably. Is there much to gain for Ohio State in this Cotton Bowl against Missouri?
Well, I think there is in terms of some of the players in the game. For instance, Devin Brown, he's got a lot of writing on that game. certainly. And some of the younger kids that are going to get some playing time that didn't necessarily get a lot of playing time in the season, they'll get some more playing time in that game. So there's playing time and positioning themselves for next season and all. And then, to be honest, there's a lot riding on it for some guys like JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, for instance. JT hasn't necessarily declared he's playing in the game, but Jack Sawyer has. And how Jack Sawyer plays could determine a lot of, does he go to the NFL or does he stay at Ohio State?
Bill Kurelic, you can get his work there at bucknuts.com, 247 Sports. Anything in particular that people need to know about what you've got working right now?
Well, I've been working all day, and I'm going to get one more. I think I've put 5 or 6 articles on our site today, recruiting wise, and have one more to go later today. It'll be a free article, so anybody can read it. Just kind of wrapping up the day in what Ohio State did in regards to their 2024 class, and then a little bit about what lies ahead, what remaining needs there are to fill.
Bill, thank you so much for dropping by. I know you got a ton going on today, and thanks for making time for us.
My pleasure. Appreciate you having me, Mark. You have a great rest of the evening.
You too.